Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Mastering Dungeons, your top 3, 8, 10, 100 tabletop role-playing game news and reviews and game design podcast. I'm Shawn Merwin, here with the very vocal Teos Abadia.
Yes, I did karaoke this weekend, and I will not reproduce that now for the betterment of all humanity.
Yeah, the greatest love of all, Teos, is podcasting for all our listeners.
I will do anything for love. And I guess I will do that. I'll podcast.
You will do podcasting. And you know, our listeners sometimes talk back to us or sing or whatever they feel like doing. And I went to our show notes today to see, do we have 2, 3 questions? Maybe it's like 12, 15 questions in there. It's ridiculous and awesome.
Yeah.
So we will try to sort of take them in order as they come in, unless there's something that particularly speaks to a topic that we've been focused on. So we'll start today with Moonbird via our Patreon Discord. I listen to the top 3 podcasts in all the realms, yours being first in my humble opinion. And I often wonder about something I don't hear much in adventure design discussions. What about intrigue and plot? I hear a lot about NPCs and motivations, scenes, interactions, monsters, settings, locations, backgrounds, classes, systems, rules, etc., but not much about building the story itself and how to design it, unless I miss something. I think about ideas such as Justin Alexander's node-based approach or event-driven approach, cascading event design, parallel, interacting, or overarching arcs, or anything else that would help build a good story, excluding sandboxes or improv. Do you use any methods such as these or others in order to weave plot and intrigue into your adventures and or campaigns? Would you recommend any tools or good articles on the subject? And thanks a lot for your great discussions and ideas. I truly believe yours is the best podcast around. Moonbird, thank you so much. We really appreciate that. Do you want me to start, Teos, or do you want to
take it? Because I know you're going to say at least one thing that I'm going to say. So say it.
Okay. So when you're planning a campaign that lasts more than a couple of adventures, one of the things that you really need to do is outline it. And unless you're simply reacting to what the players do, which I think was covered there with sandbox and improv. Yeah. So outlining, very important. And if you want to have a sort of intrigue-based, mystery-based campaign or adventure series, then it's even more important to do that. There are tons of games or systems out there that talk about creating a campaign blueprint. Fate from Evil Hat, the various flavors of Fate, will cover that. Powered by the Apocalypse games, Blades in the Dark games, both talk about it. Gumshoe games like Night Black Agents are intrigue-based games, and therefore they need a good blueprint to ensure that the story unfolds in a way that's interesting and pleasing to you. Was that what you were going to say, Teos?
That's absolutely what I was going to say. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'll add to it. So Gumshoe has, as we've talked about before for Night's Black Agents, the Conspiramid, which is a really useful tool. This sort of pyramid of things, really NPCs and agencies that the NPCs will, or the PCs will run into as they kind of unfold the mystery and realize what's going on. And they don't have to hit every block on every level. They will work their way towards the top, however they might do so, based on various clues and things they figure out and whatever attracts their attention. But it's that idea that you up front have sort of put these pieces together, right? Well, the big boss is doing, the dig in ancient Egypt to uncover the mega vampire, but the underlings are covering for that by creating this problem over here, and this other one's doing this other thing. And then at the level below that, here's what's going on. And then the level below that is where it hit the PCs initially, because what they needed was the secret to the tomb that, this agent had that was their friend. And that's why that agent was murdered, right? And so you almost you create that whole shell, and then you start at one part of it, and you're going to go through it very organically, very open play it can be, but that is how you're building that whole plot together with lots of intrigue and lots of discovery. And you can see as you think through that structure, that really facilitates that.
Mm-hmm. And so what Teos is describing here with the conspiramid is an outline.
Mm-hmm.
And you might have different forms for your outline. There are I working with folks like Phil Vecchione, who has written a great deal about prep and adventure play. Uh, I'm sure Mike Shea has his own takes on this. All of these things are jumbled in my mind about where they started, but there's also the concepts of fronts.
Right.
A front is there are three different things happening. The characters are dealing with one or the other, and maybe at some point these fronts come together. But as the characters are dealing with one, the other two fronts are moving forward.
Yeah.
And so that's another outline form that shows these are the three prongs of problems that the characters have to deal with. What they choose will then affect what happens later in the campaign. As this one threat is stamped out, this other threat grows. And the way I do it for D&D is I think of it this way. I think of it in terms of figure out what you want your campaign to be about. And how would that campaign end? The campaign is going to end. I'm going to use Aurora as an example because I've been thinking about this lately. The campaign will end when the players find out what caused the dragon rage. Right. So that's going to be the end and deal with the threat that spawned that. All right. So now I want to say, all right, how long do I want this campaign to be? Do I want it to be level 1 to 20? Let's say I want it to end at about 15th level. Right. So I'm going to divide it up into 3 arcs. The first arc will be with D&D, level 1 to 4. Second arc will be levels 5 to 10. Last 11 to 15. Cool. So I've got those 3 arcs. So I've got my end. I've got the 3 arcs. Each of those arcs needs to deliver something that will lead you to that next thing. So let me see how do I want the last arc to end before the finale? The last arc will be finding clues with all of the different dragon types, what caused it. All right, so now I have that. So with each arc, it'll be, all right, this will be fighting the red dragon. And so I'm going to work my way back from there. Now, what each adventure needs to do to get me there. All right. Do I need to gather things? Do I need to follow a line of questioning? Do I need to? So I've gone full campaign, arcs, adventures within the arc, and I'm working my way backwards.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is the same thing that Teos discussed with the Conspiramid. It's just set up in a different way.
Yeah, and that kind of arc thinking is great because we're familiar with it from novels and TV shows and all kinds of things like that, right? You can think of things like the X-Files too, where you do a mix of episodic play, and then you have back to the cigarette smoking man and all of the conspiracy that's behind everything, right? The conspiracy behind it all, and you at times return to that. You know, that's a model you can do as well. Like Chris Perkins likes talking about that a lot. When you think about arcs, it's just really about breaking that story into things that are a little more, you can put your arms around them, right? And you can also worry about one at a time. So you can think about that whole idea of like, eventually you've got to unravel all this mystery of the dragons, but initially you might just be saving a town from one threat. But that threat is linked to that. And by thinking through your arcs and your overall concepts, because you know where you're going to go, even if only loosely, it's a lot easier to tell that story. The D&D approach is often much more linear, right? Because we're thinking of things like, dungeons we're going to explore. And the most linear of that is sort of the wheels within wheels concept that D&D would classically provide, where you do against the giants. And, hey, at the end of beating the hill giants, well, the frost giants need looking into, and then the fire giants. And, oh, look, a clue saying it's really the drow. So you go into the Underdark, and eventually you end up at Lolth. Super linear, but we had a blast. So
and it's fun to think and create these convoluted, deep, dramatic stories, and a lot of people, game masters, love to do that. Where the rubber meets the road, however, is what the players are interacting with. That's why at some point you need to say, okay, this is my 4-hour adventure or 4-hour session. And these are the individual encounters that need to make up this 4-hour session so that I end at the point that introduces the next bit of intrigue. Because if you can't grip the players and their characters at that encounter level, it's all for naught.
Right.
You will never even get to the first step in your intrigue-filled story because you're introducing a ton of lore that the players don't care about. They just want to smack some goblins around. So
and with open systems,
right.
Yeah, with open systems, that's a huge problem, right? Because the more open it is, the more sandboxy, the more it can feel aimless, right? Like I'm just endlessly gathering clues that all seem important. And if you're familiar with the X-Files, you could think about how you could just endlessly have gone through all these different connections, and something needs to point you towards things that matter to make it excitement, because that excitement is really critical too. And so you have to know when to pare down. Things like red herrings may seem fun, but you can only do so many because you've got to stay in that excitement and reward level that role-playing as a social exercise is.
And I will contend that one of the reasons D&D is so successful is that it can be really gripping at the encounter level and at the story level.
Yeah.
Some games are very storytelling driven, which is fine for certain types of players. But if you take a D&D group and you go into a Call of Cthulhu game, where you go to the library and you follow the clue you found there to the newspaper, and you have to follow the clue at the newspaper to the museum, and then you follow the clue at the museum, unless there's something really interesting happening at each of those places, it can be just a follow the clue kind of fetch questy sort of thing that doesn't get them excited. Whereas D&D, if you did that very same thing, if you have two cool combats at each of those locations, you have all the players engaged, and that's why D&D can be so great. You just have to make sure that you are hitting the high points of what the game offers at each of those steps.
Yeah, and with Cthulhu, right, that's a great example what you're saying, because the grumpy, like you could say, like, what was the highlight of this? Yeah, the librarian was grumpy. But with Call of Cthulhu, it can be not just about the grumpy impediment of the librarian, but the scraps of lore you find that are interesting to your character because of these ideas. And so you have to figure out how to do that different level of excitement, let's call it, right? And that the premise of the supernatural, you're all buying into the idea that just even scratching at its surface can be rewarding. And so that has to be handled carefully to make that all fun, so that just even like, wait, did I see a monster go by or a deer in the headlights? That is fun and exciting and its own rewarding in a way that it wouldn't be in D&D, right?
Yeah. So excellent question. We will come back to probably next week some questions that tickle along those lines. But next we have George PR via Mastodon, who asks, what are your thoughts on games that have a constant hit point life total versus games where you get tougher as you go up in level or experience? And how does that factor into game design, like a Savage Worlds versus a D&D 5e? This is a tougher question for me, because level up and continuing story, those aesthetics that D&D brought into the gaming world, might be their biggest legacy. Right? What did D&D bring? It brought a ton of stuff into the game world, but this sort of leveling up and continuing to play after a session has changed games, computer games, board games. It changed everything. And so it's become so ubiquitous that thinking about a game where you play and play and play, but don't get stronger, is sort of even hard to wrap your mind around.
Yeah, for sure. And I would almost say that the reason it's fine to not have it for most games is because they don't get played as much. Dare I say that? It's far simpler, right? Like I'm running a Savage Worlds Deadlands campaign right now, as I've said. And the reality is that by having the game rules not focus on things like CR and encounter level and characters going up in level, this means that the game can be just what it is versus what it is now and what will be. You don't have to worry about low level, high level. And you do get some benefits over time, as you complete things, but it's not that same thing like Dungeons and Dragons, and you don't have, monsters that are super tiered and things like that. It's basically just coming up with when you want to throw threats in front of them. And so it's just the story of your characters, right? It's a different approach to the experience, dare I say, of the players and the story the GM is weaving, and is great for me with something like Deadlands, because I'm not going to be playing this campaign forever, right? It's a shorter thing that we're doing. And so I think actually a lot of games get lost by trying to provide too much of an experience. In fact, it's interesting that having just 10 levels was a big deal for Shadow of the Demon Lord, right? Cutting it in half. Right. And I could say that a lot of games would be fine with 5 or just 3, the way that board games will have that, like, flip your token over, your cardboard thing over to the other side. That's your second level and we're done, right? It's some way of giving you a little bit of growth, but without the game being more complex than it needs to be for how long you're going to play it.
Right. And that's the design trick right there for games, especially advancing role-playing games. Players want to feel more powerful. They want their characters to feel like they've grown. So how can you show that? How can you make them feel that without actually doing it in a mechanical way, or doing it very, very lightly in a mechanical way?
Yeah.
And Teos has already mentioned a lot of the things, but I'm thinking back on literature and how literature handles that, because maybe we can learn something from literature, right? In Lord of the Rings, did the companions, did the group with the dwarves and the Hobbit, did they get better? Well, they found a ring of invisibility, right? Well, I don't know if Bilbo gained levels. Did he have more hit points?
You could argue that Pippin and Merryweather learned to sword fight a little bit, but it's not like they're then off taking down orcs or anything like that. And it's nothing at that level, right? It's the minorest of learnings. Yeah.
So it's that desire of players to play role-playing games because they can do that.
Yeah.
Versus what sort of stories do you then have to tell with your game if you don't offer that?
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest design factor. Other than our hit points are going to stay the same throughout. We're just going to be able to do more damage.
Yeah.
And the monsters will have more hit points, but not do as many to us.
Yeah.
Right. So you could do it mathematically and make it work. But that's just a factor of math. That's not necessarily changing too much of the game organs.
So this is on my mind, both, as I mentioned last week with my playing my bard and seeing all the bonus actions I had. Well, this Saturday I joined Tom Christie and D20 Play for a game of Draw Steel at level 10, the max level. And it was funny to hear Tom say, I don't think I quite understood what I was asking of you all, because making a level 10 character from scratch when you don't super know the system, woo! I mean, there were so many features that I was working through, and then I completed level 1.
Yeah.
And then I did 2, 3, and on until I got to 10. And I mean, really, at the end of the game, it was like, okay, I would now remake my character because I've learned so much about what these abilities do. Super meaty, super tactical, the opposite of what George is asking here, right? This was just so much. And there are barriers to that, right? So in some ways, it's great if you can say, could you play a high stakes game of this RPG and have it be really not much more complicated than a low stakes game? And what does that mean, right? But that is also the fun in that this level 10 game, we were dealing with cosmic, terrible, world-changing horrors and massive floods and dragons that, are from the multiverse and all that sort of stuff. And so it was pretty wild, right? And our abilities were wild too. So.
I'm going to continue this conversation in our main segment today, where we're going through the Unearthed Arcana subclasses.
Okay.
But I'm going to put a cap right there while we get to our last question this week from Warmonger Gandhi, who came to us via YouTube. When we were talking about playtesting, uh, Warmonger Gandhi says, something I learned from playtest feedback in video games that I think applies to TTRPGs as well. When the players say something is a problem, they're usually right. When they tell you how to fix it, they're usually wrong. And I at first I was like, oh yeah, perfect. That's so pithy and so right. Mm-hmm. And then I thought about it, as I am wont to do.
Uh-huh.
And I think that's about like 80% right. Because I think TTRPGs are just slightly more, or maybe really, really much more flexible than a standard video game. Because of the play styles that people bring into the game and the GM's intrusion into making this whole game system work. So for me, with my experience with play testing or accepting playtest feedback and using it, I think that when a player or GM says something in a playtest is a problem, I believe them, but I believe that it is a problem for them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so then the important question becomes, is this a problem for a majority?
Right.
Or even a large minority of players and GMs? And if so, then how can I fix it without compromising the rest of the game? Because I'll get feedback that's like, this subclass has this feature that is too tactical. It's too long to play at the table. And I will be like, I totally agree. But guess what? 5e D&D 2024 is taking too long at the table. So is it a feature or is it a bug? I don't know. For that person, it's obviously a bug, but I have to look at everything else in relation to that. What do you think?
Yeah. So I think that there's always, like, kind of along the lines of what you're saying, it's not you don't want to ever dismiss playtest feedback. And for sure, there is that case where it's easy to say there's something off here. And then when you try to say what is off, well, you may not be seeing all of it, right? So an easy example that I've had a lot of times in playtest feedback is someone says, this encounter was too hard or too easy. What you have to then go back is say the why. Because what they said is true. For them, it was, right? Does that mean this encounter should be toned down or made harder?
Right.
I don't know. You've got to tell me more than that. And in my experience, it's when you get the why of it, right? And I've said this story before that very quickly, I'll just say there was a playtest. 3 groups playtested it. One said, this was awesome. One said, this was way too easy. You've got to beef this up. What a joke. And then the last said, this is so hard. It was frustrating. We wanted to quit. And there were reasons for it. And it's getting to those reasons. And it's just interesting to see that the Unearthed Arcana playtest this time introduced a new format. And it had been mentioned on our Discord. And when I did the survey for this Unearthed Arcana, what I found was, now what they do is they say, tell me if it's green, great as is or with minor tweaks. Yellow, I like this, but I want to see it changed. Or red, this is no go for me. And if you either choose green or red on it, you don't get to give feedback. Like, you didn't like this or you liked it. We're done with you. Thanks so much. Only if it's yellow do they then say, what made you say this?
Right.
And I can see where Wizards is coming from with this in an attempt to sort of get down to when you've got something to tell me that I can work with, then I want to listen to you, right? But as you're saying, that there are some things you're missing here, right? I hated this because X. Well, you're not hearing that. Yeah. And and if you want to say you hated it, you don't get to say that part. And that's very interesting, right? And though I still think this is worlds better than their previous way of playtesting, it's got its issues, right? Everything does.
Yeah. Yeah. And adventure playtesting is, for me, a lot different than rules playtesting. Because I've had very similar situations to you. I've sent adventures out to a group that I thought, okay, these are sort of newer players. They're not going to do as well. These are veteran players, super powerful, super power gamers. And I've had the power gamers say that's way too hard. And the group of sort of novices say it was way too easy. And I'm like, how did that happen? So it's a tricky thing, and I agree with Warmonger Gandhi here that it is tricky. The don't tell me how to fix the issue is very well taken, because many times playtesters give fixes that are worse than the original rule. Sometimes they give a rule, a suggestion that doesn't fit with the actual rules at all. But I've also had playtesters give me very reasonable suggestions that are impossible for business reasons or for interacting with rules they haven't seen yet, and you just can't use it.
Sure.
So it's always, but as Teos said, the best thing you can do is say, this didn't work. Here is what happened.
Yeah.
Because the more detailed you get, then we're getting that, it was easy because you had 3 wizards,
right?
And it was an adventure with all low level, multiple CR, low CR, multiple creatures that the fireball took out most of them in each combat. Okay, that makes sense.
And it's hard. I mean, you can think of the Unearthed Arcana. There were some cases where they'd say, what do you think about this feature? And so I'd say, it's green, but because it's not really yellow, and I don't really have a whole lot of feedback. But the truth is that feature has 2 parts. One part's awesome. One part's right? And so it's, or if I really hated the one part, well, I want to say red, but I kind of want to explain that the first part of it's actually green. And there's, it's really hard to do that. Well, okay, do they code all of their playtests into endless submenus? At some point you just got to move on, right?
Yeah, it's very true.
As we should.
Hey, thank you for those questions. We have many more to get to. At some point, we'll have to have a mailbag show, or we're never going to be able to keep up. But thank you for sending stuff in. Stay till the end of the show, and we'll tell you how you can send in your questions. But on to our news and commentary. Could I interest you, Teos, not in a new D&D movie, not in the Paramount Plus series that they had talked about, but a new Netflix D&D TV show? Double thumbs up from Teos.
Yes.
Because Deadline is reporting in an exclusive story that Netflix is developing a D&D TV live action show called The Forgotten Realms. The project comes from one of the top producers on the streamer's roster, Shawn Levy. You may have heard of Stranger Things or Deadpool and Wolverine. Not too bad pedigree there.
No.
Writer showrunner Drew Crivello from We Crashed and Hasbro Entertainment. Crivello wrote the pilot and serves as the showrunner. He will executive produce the potential series with Levy and Dan Levine of Levy's 21 Laps, say sources. That's pretty exciting.
It's super exciting, and it's wild given that, just a couple weeks ago, our news was, oh yeah, we're not going to be involved in any shows. We'll just license it out and be at distance. And oh no, wait, here we are. Also, still, our name is still on this thing. And I guess it is, it's not just D&D heralding this, but this doesn't seem any different than what it was at Paramount in terms of the setup. And it is bizarre to just think about the process of okay, we're E1 at Hasbro, and we've paid billions to have this business that will oversee media, and we're working with Ross and Marshall Thurber at Paramount Plus in 2023, and we're going to create this, and we've got a pilot, and oh, wait, it's getting sold to Lionsgate, that portions of E1. So now Hasbro has its own in-house division, Hasbro Entertainment, and we're going to create this new concept. Oh, Ross and Marshall Thurber is out. Oh, you know what? We're not doing any of these shows. And then suddenly this, right? So it's wild. And and who knows how many more steps are left before this goes forward, right? You just never know. It could just speed ahead and they go, yes, we need a replacement for Stranger Things. This could be it, go. Or it could be sit around for a couple of years and who knows.
Yeah. And then to just have it fizzle out like so many of these projects do. But hey, it's something to be hopeful for.
Yeah, and speaking of that hopefulness, the quote at the end that Deadline has is just, in success, it could launch a D&D universe. Wouldn't everybody like that?
Yeah, that would be pretty cool, I think.
Yeah.
Uh, Also pretty cool was at Winter Fantasy, Baldman Games honored their DM and community standouts. So every year at Winter Fantasy, Baldman Games holds a banquet where recognition is given to DMs, organizers, and those who make a difference. What were the awards given this year? Well, Rookies of the Year were Ryan Wynn and Amanda Leftridge. The Community Contributions Award went to Cannon Mead and Gregory L. Harris. DM of the Year, Jamie Chan and Bethany James McDonald. Lifetime Achievement Award went to Savannah Houston McIntyre. The Advisory Council appointees are Amanda Wolgamott, David Nislaw, Gregory L. Harris, and Laura Thompson. Very exciting stuff. Congratulations and thank you to all of the people who contribute to the D&D community through this organized play initiative. What else did you learn there at this banquet at Winter Fantasy, Teos?
Well, some really fun news. I love this sort of stuff. The 250,000th player was at Gen Con last year. We talked about that before. They said then that they had 263,000 by the end of the year, and they may hit 360,000 total players going through the Baldman Games conventions by Winter Fantasy 2027, which is wild. So the growth is there of how many people are going through. They had 4,000 online players last year and 22,000 total players last year. New partnerships with WizKids, Serious Dice, and Ghostfire. BMG ran 24 shows last year, 12 in person, 12 online. And Winter Fantasy marks the last premieres of AL content that are produced by Baldman Games. It will continue running those through Origins, and this got discussed a lot on our Discord. Is it really true? And yeah, Legends of Greyhawk will premiere, will preview at MagicCon, the full campaign, then premiering at Gen Con. And that means, Baldman Games is going to be making a big deal there. They're asking for all the people who want a DM to come on board for Gen Con. And the biggest cons each year for Legends of Greyhawk will be Winter Fantasy and Gen Con. But the previous work they've been doing as premier organizers with AL content from the Moonchase, that's going away. Mm-hmm. Those storylines are wrapped up and done. And so you can play them at the last few cons, but otherwise you would get them on the DM's Guild because everything pivots now to be about Legends of Greyhawk. You still will have AL content being made by the other premier organizations that are out there, right? So you've got the awesome group that's up in the UK, you've got the group that's in the Philippines, so all of this will continue moving forward with those creations. And of course, you have things like alternate programs that you can have from a number of companies, but also from like GameholeCon, right? That will have their Eastern Marches program, and right, that'll be awesome.
Yeah, they also had some seminars at Winter Fantasy, and you can see those on Twitch if you're interested, with links in our show notes. They had like time management for DMs, D&D and education, safety tools and inclusivity, longevity and DMing. Those sorts of topics were covered. And, we've tried to do this over the years through the RPGA and then through Baldman Games and then through the Herald's Guild. And so I'm glad that they picked that up again and are giving some helpful and useful information to the GMs out there. Yeah. Evil Hat has shared some data on Bluesky. Fred Hicks, founder, I believe, of Evil Hat, shared data on the company's distribution of RPG products. So between 2010 and 2024, plus 2025 up to this date, they have about $5.4 million in invoiced gross revenue and about 545,000 individual product units.
Wow.
So it's a good chunk of change for a relatively small RPG company. What else did Fred talk about here?
Given our time, I'll try to sort of summarize this down to the key of it, which is that they've had a lot of success, they say, in having a wide product breadth. And a lot of times, and they kind of divide up the timeline of this 2010 to 2024 into various chunks, like the Dresden Files era, the Fate era, the Blades in the Dark and Monster of the Week era, and how they continue to grow, seeing more success each time, but they don't necessarily know what will be big at any time. Like Monster of the Week enters their catalog in 2015, by the end of 2017, 2 years later, distribution sold to date is 2,000. Right?
Mm-hmm.
End of 2018, the Adventure Zone had covered the game. Total volume grows 800% or over 800% to be around 8.5 thousand. And in 2019, 17,000, right? So that huge growth just from one little thing that they couldn't have predicted. Blades in the Dark, I don't think anybody saw that being the success that it would end up being, right? So in 2 years, it does 1.6 million. And so the things that you may know the company for, like Fate or Dresden Files or whatever your particular, Atomic Robo, and whatever your interest area may not match what's actually making money now. And they didn't expect it either. So it's a really cool read. It's all in a thread in Bluesky and just really kind of fascinating. I think they're a very different company than most role-playing game companies, but they do it in their own way that seems to work, right? Now, important to note, Fred has often shared things like how many people will ask them, how do you become successful? And they're like, we did it for decades before you could even consider it success. And my wife has a full-time job that can afford us healthcare, right? Mm-hmm. And that he did not pay himself a salary for almost their entire timeline, right? And just lots of things like this that, success is in the quotes in italics and has many footnotes next to it, right? So it's always important. And I'm glad that they keep sharing that. It's really wonderful.
Yep. And if you like Evil Hat products and you want to stream or podcast or review, they announced a new support program for streamers, podcasters, reviewers, and others who are enthusiastic about their products. They can provide digital assets, copies of the games, and more. And so there's a link in our show notes to all of that information.
Awesome.
Yeah, we go from Evil Hat to Kickstarter. Kickstarter reports growth in 2024, which we weren't sure would happen.
Yeah.
In their blog, they discuss their superlatives, starting with how since 2009, more than 93,700 games have been kickstarted for a total of $2.63 billion and a backer community of at least 23 million people.
Wow.
In 2024, $270 million was pledged to support RPGs and games. 70% of the backers came from cross-category backers, folks who also pledged to other types of projects, which sort of surprises me.
Yeah.
But I think it speaks to Kickstarter itself being a phenomenon, not just as a single niche entity, but as a marketplace.
Yeah. You don't just go there for games, or most people apparently don't just go there for games. I do.
Yeah.
But
same here. That's why I was surprised. So what did they say about tabletop within the Kickstarter family?
So they said 83% of all game pledges are in the tabletop area, and they saw growth in lots of different ways. 6,646 tabletop games projects launched, 5,314 successfully funded, a success rate of 80%, which they said was the highest in their 15-year history. So most of these projects are seeing success and better than ever before. 220 million pledged to successful tabletop campaigns, and they listed the top 10, Cosmere RPG at 15.1 million, Discworld with 3 million, DC20 with 2.2 million. Those were the three that I saw that were RPGs. They also said video games are the strongest year in nearly a decade, with a 28% increase over the previous year. And then they, a little bit later, next week or something like that, released a blog post on the new features it's deploying this year, which include better pledge management tools and the ability for backers to pay over time. And I find myself thinking, Shawn, like that whole ridiculousness they did about NFTs and crypto stuff, like they never did anything with it other than, internal stock sale shenanigans. And if they just hadn't done that, right, they might have been so much stronger and done, and they really set themselves back with that. And I think something still that they're trying to fight to overcome is that giant misstep. It's really interesting.
Yeah, it is strange, and it shows this disconnect between a lot of the RPG community and the investor class, if you will.
Yeah.
What people want, what people see as the future. It is quite interesting. So link there in our show notes to that blog. And we have a little Dark Sun news. The Lost Cities of the Trembling Plains from Athos.org and the Pristine Tower Development Group have released another free product expanding on the world of Athos. Tell us a little bit about this product, Teos.
This thing's an amazing 180 pages, and believe it or not, work on this project began 25 years ago.
Wow.
You know, and I think I still have a Dark Sun project that I began way back when, too. So I remember when this was being worked on. Little known fact, I was one of the listserv managers for a couple of years while I was in graduate school many years ago. So this Lost Cities of the Trembling Plains covers the geography, history, and cultures of the region known as the Forgotten North. It describes the 5 strange seasons experienced by residents of the region, area descriptions and maps for several major settlements, including both settlements of the living and ruins occupied only by the undead, which Dark Sun has a fun history of intelligent undead, and players' guides to key cities and settlements in the region to help your players know what they should know. So you can get that all at athos.org, link in our show notes.
Okay. And for our creator corner, we've got 2 things to talk about. First, Keith Ammann's new book, Making Enemies, is now available for pre-order. It comes October 7th from Saga Press, where Keith will explore everything that goes into creating monsters from the ground up, including size, number, and level of challenge, habitats, motivations, monsters as metaphor, monsters and magic, the monstrous anatomy possessed by real-world organisms, and how to customize monsters for your own tabletop role-playing game and for your adventuring party to confront. And it's not just limited to one game system. It will show you how to build creations for 5e D&D, as well as Pathfinder 2e, Shadow Dark, the Cypher System, and 7th edition of Call of Cthulhu. And it includes interviews with some of the most brilliant names in RPG and creature design.
That's awesome. Can't wait to see it.
Yeah. Yep. You can go look at that at www.themonstersknow.com for more information.
Ooh.
And I got a game for Christmas that I finally got a chance to play called Horrified. And it was very fun. They have different editions. I had the Greek Monsters edition.
Ooh.
So we fought Cerberus and I think a basilisk. And not long after I had bought it and played it, did the news drop that Ravensburger Games is making a D&D version of Horrified. Terror is in the eye of the beholder, Teos. Horrified, Dungeons and Dragons.
They did there.
Will not only set players against 4 of classic role-playing games' most fearsome foes, but it will introduce new gameplay elements to the Horrified game that are inspired by D&D, including the use of a 20-sided die. So if you played Horrified before, you know what it's about, and they're going to give it a little twist to it. If you haven't played it, it's a fun, cooperative, play in an hour, 90 minutes with your friends and family game. And now you can get a D&D version that has been worked on by Peter Lee, who some of you may know from Wizards of the Coast, designed for D&D, for Magic, for D&D minis, and for the Lords of Waterdeep, as well as other board games. So you can check that out. You go to boardgamegeek.com and read all about this new version of Horrified.
Awesome. Love it.
Love it. That is our news and commentary.